documenting IT requirements, to start gathering IT requirements. So the IT requirements includes everything that I mentioned before. Everything that we're going to need from the desktop, the printers, the phones, and with the phones, it's not just, which phone is on which desk, it's which phone numbers we have, the phone trees, all these different things. Printers, we have multifunction devices, we have label printers, we have regular printers, we have a bunch of different peripherals, scanners and microphones for dictation and all these different things. And then, of course, all the application requirements. Who are the providers going to be? What are their schedules going to look like? When is this facility going to be open for business? And what pieces of software are going to be actually used? There's a certain standard set of things that we encounter on a regular basis, certain applications that we use quite a bit. And then in some other contexts, each specialty might have their own piece of software or piece of hardware and software or some system that they use to do their job. Happens a lot in specialties. Cardiology is a big one. Surgery, of course, as you might expect, and gastroenterology and OBGYN. Each one of them has their own special set of systems and tools that they use to do their job. And we have to be able to gather all that together. Now, once we've done that, and we make sure that we've got that well documented at the beginning of the project, we move into our planning stage where we are creating a project estimate and the project plan. The project estimate, I really work with construction services on this because they actually control my budget. I hand it over to them. They let me create the estimate. Well, they asked me to create the estimate, which I do. And again, working with IT, working with vendors to create an estimate. And that goes into the overall construction budget. And we'll talk more about that and the consequences of that a little bit later on. Somewhere in here, roughly around this phase, construction will have begun. We'll have gotten approval for construction to go ahead. Construction can take anywhere, depending on the size of the project, obviously, call it 8 to 12 weeks for a renovation to 2 years or more for a new facility. Again, there are a lot of ramifications to that, which we'll go into in a little bit later, but projects can stretch out over a very long time, or they can be very quick. We may get notice that, we're going to acquire this practice and have to renovate a facility to put them in, and they have to open in 2 months. And then everybody scrambles, and somehow we manage to pull together to get it done. That does happen. So we have to be able to be flexible in that regard. And just to be very clear, and if I haven't said it, I'll say it at least once. I have a lot of gratitude for my service providers, the IT department, the vendors that I work with. This is not a one-man show when it comes to actually doing the work, as you might guess. There's a lot of people involved. So I give them a lot of credit for being able to react as necessary and be able to do their jobs so well that we get things done and we get things in place very quickly. All right. Once we have created our plan, we can move on to procurement. And this is an interesting subject these days. Everybody knows that the supply chain is in an uproar and things are a long lead time, and they are. We had to wait 6 months for certain components to arrive for the Avon facility, and there are still a couple of them that are outstanding. Video cards. Video cards are a big one. And do you know why video cards are a big one? Bitcoin. Apparently, people who trade in Bitcoin put up huge server farms. And it turns out that video cards are a great processor for the transactions involved with cryptocurrency. There you go. So therefore, video cards are in short supply. Go figure. In any case, we start a procurement process. We go to our vendors and we buy a bunch of stuff, spend a lot of money. Always a good time. We create a deployment plan so we know where every piece of IT equipment is going, on what desk it's going to land, where the cable outlets are going to be for the network, where the wireless access points are going. Everything has to go onto a plan so that we can get ready for when the facility is ready. We can get in there and do our thing. At the same time, we're also coordinating with the applications. Every time we open a facility or create a new facility, we have to account for the applications, as you mentioned. And part of that means that we have to build the location and make sure that we can actually put patients at that location, put providers at that location. We can document there and so on. So there's a lot of work that goes into setting up applications. Again, the teams are very, very good at it. And I pretty much tell them this is what's going on, and we have regular checkpoints, and they never disappoint me as far as getting things done. Once construction is done, we hit a point where we can get into the building safely, and we can get our field ops team in there, we get the printer team in there, and we can start getting computers and phones and everything else on desks. We go into deployment mode. We make sure everything is in place, everything's ready to go, and then we open the doors and we start seeing patients. We also coordinate the support that goes into that part of the process, because a go live includes not just, hi, welcome to Avon Seidman Cancer Center. It means making sure that everything works in the field. There was a famous expression, I'm trying to remember who said it, that no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. That was, I think, a German general said that. Similarly, no plan ever survives first contact with the first patient. So there's always something that we have to be accounted for, and we provide support on the days of go live and thereafter. And then we get to close out the project. That does your usual mundane things, reconciling invoices to purchase orders, making sure that the money that we spend is accounted for, making sure that everybody is getting their bills paid, and most importantly, making sure that when the advanced facilities team, so myself, all of the IT people who have gotten us to this point, walk out that door, that there is a mechanism in place for people to get support after that happens. We can't just leave people and say, well, you're on your own now. We make sure they understand how to use the help desk. And the help desk is aware it's a new facility. Maybe we have to have escalated priority for some of this. So having a good plan for turnover and I can never say this word, operationalization of the facility, that's extremely important. And that's kind of the demarcation, is getting that operations piece in place, making sure that things can work going forward. All right, moving on. But enough about me. Moving on, let's actually talk about Ahuja Phase 2. And what's going to go into Ahuja Phase 2. So first of all, Ahuja Phase 2 is a part of Ahuja Medical Center, which is part of University Hospitals. It's in Beechwood, Ohio. It's over on Richmond Road. You've probably seen it there. It was opened in 2010 and has, so therefore been in place for about 10 years. It's a beautiful facility. And the time has come to expand its capabilities. And we are putting up a Phase 2 to add on to the existing building. Now, I do want to point something out, and it's important that we remember that this Phase 2, and there is a Phase 1, right? Why is that important? One of our goals in the technology piece of this is to make sure that if somebody comes to Ahuja Medical Center, their experience is as seamless as possible, whether they're in Phase 1 or Phase 2. Even though the services are different, there's a lot of different things going on. If somebody, for example, I'll give you an example, mobile technology. Mobile technology is a big part of our overall IT strategy. I want to make sure that we have people can use their phones as this is a very common thing these days. A lot of things are done on apps. Well, in order to do that, we have to have a really good cellular service in our building. So it's a big sticking point. And we have a system in our existing building that is 10 years old, and we're putting in systems in the new building. Now, if we're putting the system in the new building in phase 2, and somebody walks with their phone from Phase 2 back to Phase 1, just totally possible, and they lose their cellular connection or they lose their data connection, that's not going to fly. So we have to make sure that we acknowledge that this is a piece of a system, a piece of a whole facility sitting over there on that lot in Beechwood. So that was one of our technology goals. What are we actually putting up over there? We've got 2 new buildings. It's one of the most exciting parts of this is that it's so much. It's great. It's a new pavilion, which is a kind of a hospital space, an expansion of the existing hospital space. And then there's a sports medicine and medical office building that's going adjacent to that. Okay, this is more of an outpatient. This is more of an outpatient kind of facility, the sports medicine building. Okay, this has both inpatient and outpatient in the new pavilion. It's about 300,000 square feet of new space, and it will increase the size of the facility by 68%. Okay. Okay. And in addition to that, we are doing some remodeling and enhancements to the existing building. Okay. Let's have a look. Now, this is, I think, kind of a neat presentation. Part of the presentation, there's a virtual walkthrough that was put together by our architecture firm. And let's just sit back and relax and take a couple of minutes to watch this. It just takes you through the new facility in a very well done rendering of the new facility. Give it 1 second here. It's loading. Hopefully. Come on. Oh, I'd be bummed if it doesn't work. Worked in rehearsal. Well, okay. Oh, here we go. Well, I don't know about you. I think that's really a cool looking place. So this is how it's going to look when it is completed. This is the existing phase one area over here, the patient tower and existing facility, an existing medical office building. And these are the new buildings over here. This is the pavilion. And this is the sports medicine medical office building. So as you saw, labor and delivery, NICU, pre and postpartum, surgery, emergency room, and the breast center are going to go in the pavilion. Sports medicine, yes, there's a 40-yard football field in the sports medicine building, and men's health and orthopedics. In the sports medicine building, there's also going to be an MRI sitting off here for use for sports medicine and orthopedic purposes. Okay. In the main building, by the way, we're going to be upgrading some things with our central sterile processing and materials management, as well as implementing some additional Harrington Heart and Vascular Institute cardiology services that are going to be added in there as well. So that's what's going in there. Okay, our timeline, where we are now, we started construction in March of this year. And if you've driven down Richmond Road, you've probably seen the steel and so on that has been actually topped out already over there. It's pretty neat. We're going to start our application work and our IT work in January. That's the plan. Although there's some preliminary things going on already. Some of the long lead time systems are already being talked about. We're supposed to finish construction, give or take, March of 2023, and we're supposed to open in June of 2023. Okay. So what are some of the challenges that a project manager sees in a place like this? So first of all, there's just the size of the project. And there's the physical size, it's 300,000 square feet. It's 2 buildings, each with several levels. And there's a bunch of service lines going in here. And one of the things that we have to deal with here is the fact that from a hospital standpoint, this is 2 different kinds of medical facilities that are being put up here at the same time. The pavilion is an extension of hospital space. The sports medicine is outpatient space. And there are different ramifications from a lot of different aspects, billing, providers, right now the applications we use between those 2 facilities. As I mentioned before, with all the different service lines coming in, there's all these different applications, one for each specialty there, right? Labor and delivery, which doesn't exist currently at Ahuja, and I'm personally very excited about because I love babies, and it's one of my favorite things to have to deal with. So I think that having L&D there and a NICU and a nursery, very exciting. There's also just a huge number of technology moving parts. So from my standpoint, there's so many different things that are involved in putting these buildings together. And it's not just the applications, obviously. It's also all the different pieces of hardware and peripherals and the integrations that we have with medical equipment. You know, we have a surgery center, and surgery uses a whole lot of specialized equipment. And all of that, almost every piece of medical equipment really, has a connection back to the IT world. So I interface with all of that with my IT counterparts and with my clinical engineering counterparts to get that done. So there's also a lot of people involved, as you might imagine. Between construction services, the contractors on the job, there's thousands of, I don't know about thousands, but hundreds of contractors and people putting up the building, steel workers and carpenters and electricians and plumbers and HVAC people. There's just a ton of people. And then you get to the IT side of the house, and there's, a lot of people involved in that too. My meetings on this will probably have, 50 people in them when we get rolling on a regular basis. Okay. And specifically, the number of PMs involved. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then there are the risks. So in my way of thinking about project management, people talk about, well, I manage projects, therefore I'm a project manager. To me, what really differentiates a real project manager from a dabbler, from a dilettante, is the ability to manage risk. Now, that's not everybody's take on it. That's my own personal thing. And maybe it's because managing risk is one of my favorite subjects, but that's, to me, one of the big differentiators for a project manager, the ability to handle risk. So risks, what risks? Okay, there's lots of risks. So of course, what are the risks? How do we manage them? There are budget risks. So there's, of course, as you might guess, a very strict budget for getting this building built and open. And that budget was set a long time ago, with some preliminary thinking about the revenue that the building will generate and the strategic initiatives and so on and so forth, and strategic planning and the business management side of the house put together a budget for this. And as I say, that got created a long time ago, but it's pretty rigid. We can't really do much to violate the budget. In fact, the technology budget, as I mentioned before, is part of the construction budget. And every once in a while, if I'm running a little flush on my technology side of the house, construction services will say, well, we're taking some of that money back. So we need it for something else. So, okay. So I do have to be careful with that. And, but it's just a matter of having a very good handle early on as possible to understand what the budget needs to be and to mitigate the risk of going over budget, again, simply by being as well ahead of the curve as we can, making purchase decisions as early as possible. We've already got our network gear in the pipeline because we were worried about price increases and shortages. So things like that help with keeping the budget in line. And of course, there's scope risks. And again, when you're talking about a major facility like Ahuja Phase 2, the design of this started a couple of years ago and really got detailed early this year, and actually late last year, early this year. So the scope has been pretty fixed for a long time. Now, one of the things that happens is that, let's say that there's a provider, a very high profile doctor, and he wants to join UH. And he's a rainmaker, frankly. He brings in a lot of revenue. He's highly prestigious. He's well published. He is highly rated. And he's done a ton of research, and he's got a lot of connections in the clinical business and innovation space, and all these great things. We really want him. And he says, I will only come to UH if we can implement XYZ robotic microsurgery, some such system. And that system costs a lot of money, and it costs a lot of reconfiguration of operating rooms, perhaps, and things like that. That's one of the things that will get weighed out very carefully. And in a lot of cases, we're going to say, yeah, we have to do that. And then we have to figure out how we're going to deal with that once that possible risk gets realized. And that usually means having significant contingency. The other side of that is, of course, if we're getting this guy, he's going to bring a lot of revenue, which kind of offsets some of the impact that we would have to that change in scope. Okay, schedule risks. It's Cleveland. Welcome to Cleveland, where the weather, if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes. It could snow at any time, including June. So we're never quite sure what that's going to bring for us. So that can cause some delays in scheduling, in executing the schedule, especially during the construction period. Once the building is enclosed, everybody breathes easier because now the weather isn't nearly as much of a factor. Supply chain. Do I have to really say much more about supply chain these days? It's a mess. And we have been seeing some things loosen up a little bit when it comes to the supply chain. Some things have started showing up that are perhaps harbingers of good things to come. We're hoping that that is alleviated soon. Resource risk. So there's a couple of aspects to this that I will call out. Because of the pandemic, earlier on in some of the projects that we've had, and perhaps earlier on in Ahuja, there were limits on the number of people you could have working on the building at the same time because they couldn't be so close together. So we'd have to have lower staff than we would have liked. There were a lot of people out who were sick with COVID, so they couldn't be there. So we had to scramble for resources to do the construction and aspects of that. And same thing with on the IT side. So that too. How are we going to deal with that? We're going to make sure that we have a deep enough bench that we can get the construction done as efficiently, as effectively as possible. A lot of that's on the general contractor side of the house and the construction side of the house to manage. And they do a great job, and they make sure that things keep moving, and that if a particular stage of the project gets delayed because they can't staff it, they can move on to plan B. They can work on something else. So it's a very elaborate dance that they have to do to make sure that everything is coordinated. I don't pretend to be able to be a construction project manager. Those guys are really amazing. So technological risks. As I mentioned before, one of the ways we mitigate some of the other risks is by getting in early, getting things bought. Well, the problem with that is that a lot of technology is only going to be there for 1 to 2 years. The life cycle on certain things could be as little as 18 months. 3 years is usually what we go for, sometimes 5. Well, if we've got all of our stuff bought, and then all of a sudden the base model that we're using changes, or the requirements change because of a different software platform or something like that, that's a risk. That's a risk. So we have to be able to deal with that. And again, sometimes it's a relocation of some piece of equipment from here to account for it. A lot of times we will try to buy in advance, and we have our life cycle team who can supply us with certain equipment in a rapid deployment fashion, and then we pay them back as things get replenished. So we try to keep things on as stable a platform as possible so that we don't get too far, get behind the 8 ball by having technology too soon. Okay, I've created this thing, I call it governance risk. And I say, is that a thing? I don't know if I've ever heard of it before, but this is what that looks like. Okay, how many PMs does it take to put up a building, right? So there's all these different boxes that I mentioned before. We've got our clinical and business management team, and they really steer the project. They make the decisions about what's going in from a design, technology, functionality standpoint, everything that has to go into the building and be able to see patients. And they also have the overall say on scope, budget, and timeline. There's the construction services project manager. Now, our construction services team is outsourced to Sodexo. They provide us with our very capable construction services managers. I've worked with many of them, and they're outstanding. And they are for any of you who are in construction or anything like that, or real estate, there's something called an owner's representative. So they serve as our owner's representative. They look out for our best interests with all of the constituencies that they manage, which includes the general contractor, all of their subcontractors and vendors, the medical equipment planner and all of their vendors, and then advanced facilities, and then IT and their vendors, and advanced facilities vendors, okay? Now, why are there so many boxes here? Again, this is just portraying the project managers. Well, yeah, every one of these boxes, and off to the side here is operations. Hold on. Every one of these boxes here in, I don't even know what color this is, I'm kind of colorblind, but this lighter yellowish orange color, there could be 1 or more project managers involved in any aspect of this, each having their own little chunk of the project to manage. For example, in the IT department, each application, if it's big enough, could have a PM handling their part of the project. So there's a lot of managers with their little bits of scope. And of course, that engenders risk. Because what happens if, well, we got to have who makes the decision? Who's in charge? Whose scope is that? Whose responsibility is that? It's yours, it's mine, no, it's his, it's mine, no, it's mine. There's a lot of that. And really having clear lines around responsibilities and who's responsible for what is extremely important. And at this level, the construction services PM level, at this level, there's actually some pretty good coordination that has to go on. And we talk to each other a lot. I'm in on as many of the construction management calls as I can be. And then we have our regular IT cadence, and our vendors are involved in that. IT is involved in that. And so is the medical equipment planner. And a lot of times, even the clinical and business management folks are on my calls. Now, one of the challenges that we run into with some of these buildings, again, because the lead time on a big building is so long, you might have one management team in place up here at this level when the building is conceived and spec'd out, and this is what we're going to do. And then a year and a half in, when construction is a year and a half old, a different management team comes in. And suddenly we have to make some changes. Okay, that's one risk. The other part of it is that the whole purpose of the building might change. It happens. And then we're not sure who's really in charge of running the building after the fact. So we've gotten better at this, by the way. When I first started, it was a challenge. It's gotten a lot better. So now there is someone from the operations side of the house, someone who's going to be responsible once the this is who we hand the keys to, is going to be this operations team. And there will be a project manager, sometimes from the PMO, sometimes not. There will be an operations team that will be responsible for opening the doors, setting things like, the hours of operation, and handling things like credentialing and staffing and things like that. That's all on this side, preparing for the day when the building is open. Okay. So all of these things and all these different little boxes really have to kind of blur together and work together to make sure that everything works smoothly, the place gets opened on time, we can see patients, and they can have a great experience. And the caregivers as well can have a great experience. Okay, so that leaves us with questions and answers. I hope that this has been a helpful presentation for you about how we do things and how I do things in my world, and a little bit about Ahuja Phase 2 and the challenges we face there. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. I see that there's some in the chat, or the comments anyways. Let's see, let's go back up here. What, if any, design changes occurred as a direct result of the pandemic? Did anything get changed as the pandemic became? Let me read this a little more clearly. What, if any, design changes occurred as a direct result of the pandemic? Did anything get changed as the pandemic became part of our lives, or is it viewed as a temporary situation? That's a very good question. And they're all good questions, but let me start by saying that. So when the pandemic first hit, a couple of things happened. First of all, everything went on hold because we really had no idea what was going to happen from a capital situation. Nobody knew. So a lot of projects got to a point and we had to say, well, we're not sure we're going to do that yet. That was part one. When it became clear, midway through last year, give or take, that things were going to be okay, we're going to make it through, capital started flowing again and things got further in design. At that time, we weren't making changes to design for the pandemic. We weren't setting up rooms with social distancing. We weren't putting partitions in. Later designs are including a little bit more of the pandemic, accounting for the pandemic, dividers in some places. We have more lucite in front of the registration desks, for example, and some of the work areas, even though they're planned, for example, we'll have a workroom that's planned for 6 providers to do their charting or whatever. That'll get cut back to 2 or 3 people in operation. So the planning is still as though that it is temporary, but in operation, we're very cognizant of what's going on and trying to make things as safe as possible for the providers and for the patients. Any other questions? And you can ask me either through the microphone or you can ask me through the chat. I hope I wasn't on mute the whole time. Oh, there we go.
So what is your biggest concern going into this at this point?
The biggest concern right now is it's neck and neck between lead time on certain items and resource constraints on the application side of the house. We have to make sure that we can get all of the application setups. There's a whole bunch of different things going in to this facility, and as I say, each one is a little chunk of project. We have to make sure we have the people to staff those. I think we're going to be okay. I think they've accounted for that over on the application side of the house. And we have about a year and a quarter, which should be plenty of time to get that work accomplished. But that's one of my bigger concerns. Other questions?
Okay, and I guess another question is for folks on the line, as a takeaway, is there any words of advice that you can give people that are going to be working on something as large as what you're going to be a part of?
The most important thing is to be in there early and often, and to insert yourself into the process as early in the process as possible. And even if, well, we haven't gotten to that part yet, be there. If you're an experienced project manager, especially if you're experienced at your place of business, you know things and you can contribute. And you also have your ear to the ground. You know what's going on elsewhere in the hospital or in your company. You know what else is going on because you've managed projects elsewhere in your company. You can bring a lot to the table and be at the table from the beginning. That's the most important thing.
Thank you, Phil.
Pleasure. Anything else?
Just a question from facility management view.
Mm-hmm.
Do the facility management or operation management team has a role in this project, starting from initiate, project mobilization, design, implementation till the closing and handing over to them, or they just like at the end of the projects you hand over and you show them the final result, or do they have like a role in design? Because it's sometimes like they have like to look at design from the facility management view, how that will help them to run the business or to run the facility.
Right, and that's a great point. That facilities, again, just like IT, needs to be at the table right away. Building systems, the choices for building systems are extremely important, especially in a case like this, where we're adding on to an existing facility, all the more so, and it's very complex. Furthermore, there are system standards, that we want to make sure that we hold to. That, by the way, is one of the other reasons to be at the table early, because you know what the standards are. You need to make sure that everybody else knows what the standards are and what we're heading for. Like if there's a new building management system in the pipeline, bring it up, let them know. Facilities has to do that. Facilities has a right to have their say on what systems are going into this new facility. It's at UH certainly, and at any big multi-site company, we don't operate in a vacuum, except for the vacuum tube system that operates in a vacuum. We as a project team don't operate in a vacuum. We know what's going on elsewhere, and we know what's coming. We want to make sure that standards are adhered to, not just because we're sticklers, but because that's the most efficient and effective way to run an enterprise. One of the things I learned, I worked for National City Bank of blessed memory, now PNC, and that's where I learned about enterprise computing. And really the key to the success there, and it's the same for facilities management, is a somewhat ruthless adherence to standardization across the system. It's really the best way to approach it. You run into just too many messes otherwise. So yes, they are there at the beginning. They're in on the design and selection of systems, and all the way through until they start programming the heating controls in every one of the exam rooms. By the way, I think exam room thermostats, I think they're placebos. I don't think they really do anything, just me. Other questions? All right, I appreciate everybody's attention. I hope this was interesting for you. And I am grateful to PMINEO for letting me have the floor for the evening, and looking forward to whoever is in the box next. And that's all I got.
Great job, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I'll just share the close part of this presentation. I'm sharing. Yeah, for this PDUs, we will send email contain the claim PDU claim code, and in PMI.org, where you just put this claim code here, apply, you will get the PDUs related to this subject or this event. And again, visiting PMINortheastohio.org and click on events, you see event lists. That will take you to our coming event. We'll update this. Just keep looking for updates. Also, follow us on our social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and other. You'll get the updates, news, and or coming events. Just a reminder how you keep up with your PDUs. These are the list of one of them is like Northeast Ohio chapter events and other podcast sites. And that's all. Thank you all.
Thank you. Unless there are any other questions or comments, that concludes this evening's presentation. Well, I will leave the microphone open for anyone who has any last-minute questions. Otherwise, have a good evening.
All right, thanks,
Yeah, thank-
everybody.
Hey, thank
Great
you.
job, Phil.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Amir,
Yes.
I missed the first 10 minutes of his presentation. Sorry.
Hey, no worries. I forgot to remind you. And am I still sharing?
You appear to be, yes. I'm gonna